The battlefield was silent for a moment, but only for a moment. Then the clash of steel, the roar of alien beasts and the screams of the dying filled the air again. Dust rose under the red sky, and the ground shook with the weight of marching soldiers. In the middle of the chaos stood a lone warrior. Her name was Kayla, a soldier of the last free clan. Her armor was dented, her body was bruised, but her eyes still burned with fire. Around her were dozens of enemies, armored raiders of the Empire, their blades sharp and their voices cruel. Kayla gripped her spear, her only weapon. She breathed hard, sweat and blood dripping down her face. She knew this was the end, but she would not fall without a fight. The raiders circled her, laughing like wolves around wounded prey. One shouted, "Throw down your weapon, girl, and we may let you live as a servant." Another hissed, "Or perhaps we'll chain you and sell you like the others." Kayla only tightened her grip. She raised her spear and shouted back, "I will never kneel." With a roar, the raiders charged. Kayla spun her spear, striking one in the chest. Ducking under another's blade, she moved like a storm, fast and sharp. For a moment, the circle trembled. But then she heard the sound that broke her heart. Crack. Her spear split down the middle, the wood snapping under the force of a raider's sword. The broken half fell from her hands. Kayla stumbled back, now holding nothing but a shattered stick. The raiders laughed, their voices cruel. "Now she breaks," one sneered. "Now she learns fear," another added. Kayla looked at her broken weapon. Then at the circle closing in, she knew she would die here. But even in her last breath, she swore to stand. She lifted the broken shaft like a dagger. Blood poured from a cut on her arm. Her knees shook, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. "If I fall," she whispered. "I fall free." The raiders rushed forward, blades raised, claws ready, laughter echoing. And then the sky split open, a streak of light cut across the battlefield. The raiders froze for a moment. Looking up in shock, someone, fell from the sky, crashing into the dust between Kayla and her enemies. The ground shook from the impact, a cloud of dirt rising around the figure. For a moment, no one could see clearly. The raiders stepped back. Growling in confusion, Kayla's eyes widened, her broken weapon trembling in her grip. When the dust cleared, a tall figure stood there, not alien, not of her world, a man, broad-shouldered, scarred, wearing strange armor, torn and burned. His eyes, unlike any she had seen, glowed not with power but with something far more dangerous, determination. The raiders shouted, "What is this? Another trick? Another slave?" But the man only looked at Kayla, then at the circle of enemies around them. He gave a small, almost casual smile. "Mind if I join the fight?" he said, his voice calm, almost playful. Kayla's breath caught. She had never seen his kind before, never heard of his people, but in that moment, when hope was gone and death was certain, a stranger had fallen from the sky and he stood at her side. The raiders roared with anger. "Kill them both!" They charged, blades flashing, teeth bared, but the man moved. He was fast, faster than Kayla thought possible. He grabbed the first raider's blade with his bare hand, twisting it free and striking the raider with the hilt. He ducked under another's swing, driving his shoulder into the attacker's chest, sending him sprawling. Every move was rough, unrefined, but powerful. He fought not like a soldier, but like someone who had survived 1,000 battles. Kayla watched in shock as he tore through the circle. One raider after another fell, their confidence turning to confusion, then to fear. The man grinned, blood on his cheek. His eyes wild. He was not afraid, not even surrounded. He looked like someone who had been waiting for this fight. Kayla, inspired by his defiance, raised her broken spear shaft and joined him. Side by side, they cut into the raiders. She blocked strikes aimed at his back. He caught enemies that lunged at her. Two warriors, strangers to each other, yet fighting as one. The ground was soon littered with the bodies of fallen raiders. The survivors pulled back, their snarls turning to uneasy silence. For the first time, the hunters had become the hunted. The man stood tall, breathing hard, his fists bloody but steady. Kayla leaned on her broken weapon, her chest heaving. She looked at him, her voice trembling. "Who are you?" The man wiped blood from his brow and gave a tired smile. "Just a human," he said, "nothing special." But Kayla knew, even without understanding what a human was, that this stranger was no ordinary man. He had fallen from the sky, and with him had fallen something far greater. Hope. The raiders stared at them from a distance. their leader growling. "This is not over," he snarled, retreating into the smoke, and Kyla, clutching her broken spear, whispered, "No, it has only begun." The battlefield smelled of smoke and blood. The wind carried the cries of the wounded and the groans of the dying. Kayla stood still, her hands trembling on the broken spear shaft. She looked again at the man beside her, the stranger who had fallen from the sky. He was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling, but his eyes never left the enemy. The raiders had pulled back, regrouping in the shadows. Their leader, a tall beast with 4 arms and black armor, barked orders in their harsh tongue. Kayla understood enough of the language to know what he said. "Kill the human first. He is the danger." The raiders snarled in agreement, their weapons raised once more. Kayla felt fear grip her heart. She had fought raiders her whole life, but never had she seen them afraid of anything. And now they feared this man. The stranger turned his head slightly and spoke to her, his voice calm as though he were not surrounded by killers. "Stay behind me if you need to. You're hurt." Kayla's pride burned at the words. "I am no child," she snapped. But the man only gave a crooked grin, one corner of his mouth lifting. "I can tell," he said softly. "You're still standing when others would be crawling. That makes you stronger than most." Before she could answer, the raiders attacked again. The first wave came fast, 6 of them rushing in with blades and spears. The human did not retreat. He advanced. With shocking speed, he closed the distance. His fist smashed into one raider's jaw with a crack that echoed like a whip. The creature flew back, crashing into another and toppling them both. A second raider swung low with a curved blade. The man caught the weapon between his forearm and ribs, gritted his teeth against the pain, then twisted the raider's wrist until the bone snapped. Kayla stared in disbelief. This was not the way of her people, not the trained patterns of spear and shield. This was raw, brutal survival. Every strike from the man looked heavy, almost reckless, but everyone landed with precision, breaking bones, crushing armor, shattering will. Who fights like this? Kayla thought. Who is he? The third raider lunged at him from behind, claws raised. Kayla did not think. With a shout, she leapt forward, slamming her broken spear shaft into the raider's throat. The creature gagged and fell, writhing on the ground. The man glanced at her with a brief, approving nod. "Good timing," he said, before driving his elbow into another enemy's face. The raiders fell back again, growling in frustration. Their leader stepped forward this time. He was massive, larger than the rest, his forearms gripping 2 long blades that shimmered in the smoky air. Scars ran down his face and his eyes glowed with cruel hunger. Kayla knew this one, Vorik, the warlord of the south. He had burned villages, chained children, slaughtered her kin. Her stomach twisted at the sight of him. Vorik pointed one of his blades at the man. "You are no warrior," he growled in his guttural voice. "You are prey that fell from the sky. I will tear the flesh from your bones and feed it to my hounds." The man wiped blood from his cheek with the back of his hand. Then he smiled. Not a polite smile, not a friendly one, but the grin of someone who had heard worse and survived. "You can try," he said simply. The words struck Kayla harder than the clash of steel. He stood unshaken before the monster who had terrified her people for years. Vorik roared and charged. The ground shook beneath his massive frame. His forearms moved like a storm, blades cutting the air with deadly speed. The man dodged the first strike, leaning just enough for the blade to miss his face. He blocked the second strike with his forearm, blood spraying from the cut, but he didn't stop. With shocking strength, he closed in, driving his fist into Vorik's chest. The warlord staggered back. Not much, but enough for the other raiders to gasp in disbelief. No one had ever struck him like that before. Kayla's heart pounded as she watched. Every blow, every movement of the human seemed impossible. He was outmatched in size, outnumbered, and weaponless. And yet he fought as though the battlefield itself belonged to him. The duel raged on. Vorik's blades flashed again and again, but the man twisted, ducked, blocked, taking wounds but never falling. Every time the warlord struck, the human struck back. A punch to the ribs, a knee to the gut, a headbutt that cracked bone. The raiders shouted, trying to rush in, but Kayla moved to block them. She stood with her broken spear shaft, her body weak, her arms heavy, but she refused to let them interfere. This fight, this impossible fight, belonged to him. Minutes passed like hours. Blood poured from cuts on the man's arms and legs. Vorik's breathing grew louder, harsher, his rage burning hotter with every moment. And still the man fought on. At last the warlord raised all four arms for one final strike, blades poised to cut the human in half. The man looked up at him, eyes steady, chest heaving. Then he did something Kayla did not expect. He stepped forward into the attack. The blade slashed, one cutting deep across his shoulder, another slicing his side. But in that moment of closeness, the human drove his fist upward with all his strength. It struck Vorik under the jaw with a crack like thunder. The warlord's head snapped back. The massive beast staggered, his blades falling from his hands, his body collapsing with a crash that shook the battlefield. Silence fell. The raiders froze, staring at their fallen leader. Their snarls died in their throats. The human stood above Vorik's body, blood dripping from his wounds, his chest heaving. Slowly he raised his eyes to the circle of enemies. "Who's next?" he asked, his voice low but sharp as steel. None of them moved. None dared. For the first time, Kyla saw fear in the eyes of the raiders. They backed away, dragging their wounded with them, their whispers filled with confusion and terror. Not possible. Not possible. Kayla's knees nearly gave out. She staggered toward the man, her breath shaky. "You," she whispered, staring at him with wide eyes. "No one defeats Vorik. No one." The man turned to her. His face was pale, his body trembling from blood loss, and yet he smiled again as if the pain were nothing. "I told you," he said softly. "I'm just human." And then his legs gave out and he collapsed into the dust. Kayla dropped beside him, panic rising in her chest. The battlefield was quiet now, but she knew silence would not last. The raiders would return with more. If this man died here, their hope would die with him. She pressed her hand against his wounds, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Don't you dare leave, human. Not after this, not after saving me." But his eyes were already closing. The wind howled across the battlefield, and far away in the smoke and shadows another pair of eyes was watching. Eyes that had seen what happened, eyes that understood what the rise of a human would mean for the galaxy. He should have been dead already. No one could take blows like that from Vorik and still draw breath. And yet the man's chest rose and fell, slow but strong, as if his body refused to give in. Kayla tore a strip from her cloak and bound his shoulder. Her own arms trembled from exhaustion. She wanted to collapse, but she forced herself to stay upright. He had saved her. She would not let him die here. With effort, she pulled his limp arm over her shoulders and dragged him across the field. Each step was agony, her legs weak, her ribs aching from earlier strikes. But she pressed on, teeth clenched until the ruined battlefield was behind them. At the edge of the forest, Kayla lowered him onto soft moss. His skin was pale, his face drenched in sweat. She brushed damp hair from his forehead. "Why did you fight like that?" she whispered, more to herself than him. "Why risk everything for me?" The man's eyes fluttered open for a moment. His lips moved, forming words too soft to hear. Kayla leaned close. "Because you asked," he murmured. Then his head fell back into unconsciousness. Kayla froze. Because she asked? That was all? Her people had begged for help for generations. They had cried out as villages burned, as children were taken, as warriors were slain. And no one came. But this man, a stranger who fell from the sky, heard one plea and answered with fire and fists. "Who are you?" she whispered again. The forest gave no answer. But somewhere far above, stars glimmered faintly through smoke. For hours, Kayla tended his wounds. She cleaned cuts with water from a stream, wrapped them in fresh bandages, and whispered prayers to the old spirits. Yet even as she worked, unease gnawed at her. Something about his body was different. His blood was darker, thicker than hers. His muscles, even when limp, felt dense, like forged iron. And when she placed her hand on his chest, she felt not just a heartbeat, but a rhythm, steady and powerful. Like the beating of war drums, it frightened her, but it also gave her hope. As night fell, Kayla heard movement in the trees. She froze, hand reaching for her broken spear shaft. Shadows moved. Leaves rustled. Then a voice, low, cold, dangerous one, spoke from the darkness. "You should not have saved him." Kayla spun toward the sound. A figure stepped into the moonlight, tall, cloaked with a mask of bone covering its face. In one hand it carried a staff tipped with glowing crystals. Kayla's stomach twisted. She knew this kind of being. Not raider, not villager. Something worse. A watcher. The Watchers were ancient beings who wandered the lands, neither friend nor foe, always observing, always judging. No one knew their true origin, only that they appeared at moments when fate shifted. The masked figure tilted its head at the unconscious human. "He is not supposed to be here," it said. "A storm has entered the river of destiny, and you made it worse by saving him." Kayla tightened her grip on the spear shaft.
"He saved me first," she said, her voice steady despite her fear.
The Watcher gave a low, rasping laugh. "You think he saved you? Child, you do not understand. He is the danger. If he lives, your world will burn." Kayla's heart pounded. She glanced at the man, pale and still on the moss. "He is human," she whispered. "That is all." The Watcher leaned closer, its masked face inches from hers. The glowing crystals of its staff pulsed brighter. "No," it hissed. "He is not just human. He is the last spark of a fire your people do not remember. A fire that once burned across the stars. A fire so bright that the galaxy still trembles at its memory." Kayla's mouth went dry. She wanted to ask what that meant, but her throat refused to form the words. The Watcher's gaze lingered on her a moment longer, then it straightened. "Choose carefully," it said. "Save him and you may doom us all. Leave him and the storm may pass." And with that the Watcher vanished into the trees, its form dissolving into mist. Kayla sat frozen, her breath ragged. She looked at the human again, at his wounded body lying helpless on the moss. Doom or hope, and which was he? Her hands clenched into fists. It didn't matter. Doom or hope, she owed him her life, and she would not abandon him. "Whatever you are," she whispered, "you're mine to protect now." The night passed slowly. Kayla barely slept, her ears tuned to every sound in the forest. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the Watcher's mask, heard its warning. But when dawn broke, she saw the man stirring. His eyes opened slowly, blinking against the light. He groaned, tried to sit, and nearly fell back, but Kayla steadied him. "You're awake," she said softly, relief washing over her. The man looked at her, his gaze sharp despite his weakness. "Where are we?" "Safe," Kayla answered, though she wasn't sure it was true. He leaned back, breathing deeply. Then he looked down at the bandages on his arms and sighed. A faint smile touched his lips. "You did this?" Kayla nodded. "Then I owe you," he said simply. She shook her head. "No. You already paid that debt on the battlefield." They sat in silence for a while, the morning birds calling overhead. Then Kayla finally asked the question that had burned in her since last night. "What are you?" The man's smile faded. His eyes darkened, and for a long time he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, heavy with something she couldn't name. "I'm human," he said, "but not the kind you think." Kayla frowned. "What do you mean?" He turned his face away toward the rising sun. "My people. Once long ago we fought wars you cannot imagine, wars that burned entire worlds. We were feared, hated, respected, and then we disappeared." Kayla's breath caught. The Watcher's words echoed in her mind. The galaxy still trembles at its memory. The man looked at her again. "I don't know why I'm here. I don't know how I fell into your world. But if the raiders fear me, it's because they remember what humans used to be, not what we are now." Kayla swallowed hard. The forest suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. "You say we," she whispered. "But are there more like you?" The man's expression grew distant, almost sorrowful. "Not anymore." The silence that followed was broken by a sound in the distance, horns deep and mournful echoing through the valley. Kayla stiffened. She knew that sound well. The raiders were gathering again. The man tried to rise, but pain shot through his body and he fell back with a curse. Kayla looked toward the smoke rising in the distance, then at him. She felt fear, but also a strange fire in her chest. They were coming, and this time they would not retreat. The horns echoed through the valley, low and grim, shaking the morning air like thunder. Kayla froze, her heart racing. The raiders had not fled for long. They were returning, and this time they would come in greater numbers. The human stirred beside her, wincing as he pushed himself up on one elbow. Blood still stained his bandages, but his eyes were sharp, awake now. "They're coming," he said quietly, as though he could feel the vibrations in the earth itself. Kayla nodded, her grip tightening on the broken spear shaft. "Too many for us. We can't fight them all." The man studied her for a long moment, then gave a short nod. "Then we don't fight. We survive." Kayla blinked. "Survive how?" "They'll search every path. They'll burn the forest if they have to." The man's eyes narrowed. "Then we make them chase shadows. Keep moving." Use their numbers against them. His calm voice steadied her, but fear still gnawed at her ribs. These were not just raiders anymore. They were vengeance itself, coming to reclaim honor after their warlord's fall. The first signs appeared minutes later. Smoke rose on the horizon, black trails climbing into the pale sky, birds scattered from the treetops. The sound of heavy boots and snarling beasts echoed through the trees. "They're here," Kayla whispered. The man stood, swaying but refusing to fall. He tore strips from his bloodied shirt and tied them tighter around his wounds. He glanced at her. "Lead the way. You know these lands better than I ever could." Kayla hesitated. She was used to fighting alone, surviving alone, but now his gaze, steady and unflinching, gave her no choice. She nodded and turned into the deeper forest. They moved quickly but quietly. The forest floor was soft with moss, muffling their steps. Branches clawed at their clothes, the scent of pine sharp in their lungs. Behind them the horns called again. Closer, Kayla guided them toward an old hunting path that wound between ridges and streams. Few knew of it and fewer dared use it. It was said to be haunted by ancient spirits. But to Kayla, spirits were kinder than raiders. As they walked, the man's breathing grew heavier. His wounds slowed him, his face pale from blood loss. Yet every time she offered to stop, he shook his head. "Keep moving," he said. "If we stop, they'll catch us." Kayla admired his resolve but feared he would collapse. And deep inside, she wondered, was the Watcher right? Was she protecting a savior or dragging along the doom of her people? By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. From the shadows of the trees, Kayla and the man watched as the raider army spread out below. Dozens, no hundreds, poured into the valley, their armor clattering, their beasts snarling. Smoke from their torches stained the air. "They brought everything," Kayla whispered, her throat dry. "They mean to scour the land until they find us." The man studied the sight, his jaw tight. Vorek's death shamed them. "Now they need blood to wash it away." Kayla turned to him. "You can barely stand. If they find us, we won't last a minute." For the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not fear, but calculation. He was thinking, planning. "There's a way," he said finally. "But it won't be easy." "What way?" she asked. He pointed toward the far end of the valley where jagged cliffs rose into the mist. At their base, dark caves opened like mouths. "Those caves," he said. "We can disappear inside. Too narrow for beasts, too dark for their scouts. If we reach them, we might live." Kayla's stomach nodded. The caves were feared. Legends told of things that lurked inside, shadows that whispered, spirits that devoured the living. But the horns behind them left little choice. "Fine," she said. "But if we die in there, it's your plan they'll curse." The man almost smiled. "I'll take the blame." They descended the ridge carefully, every step measured. The raiders were spreading wider now, groups breaking off to search the forest. Kayla and the man moved through gullies and streams, masking their trail. More than once they froze as scouts passed near, their guttural voices grating in the stillness. At one point, a raider beast, a hulking creature with tusks and glowing eyes, sniffed the air and turned toward their hiding place. Kayla's pulse hammered in her ears. The man placed a hand on her arm, holding her still, his breath silent. The beast growled, sniffed again, then turned away, dragged back by its handler. Kayla let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They pressed on. Hours later, as the sun dipped low, they reached the cliffs. The cave mouths loomed before them, dark and ominous, cold air drifting out like the breath of some great beast. Kayla shivered. The man glanced at her. "Afraid?" She lifted her chin. "No, only cautious." "Good," he said. "Fear keeps you alive. But don't let it own you." They stepped into the cave. The world changed instantly. The air grew damp, heavy with the scent of stone and earth. Drips echoed in the distance. The faint light from outside died quickly, replaced by deep shadows. Kayla lit a small torch, its flame weak but steady. The passage wound downward, narrow and jagged. Strange carvings marked the walls, symbols Kayla had never seen. They twisted in the flickering torchlight, shapes that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking. "Do you see this?" she whispered. The man nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, old, very old." As they moved deeper, the sounds of pursuit faded. The raiders' horns grew distant, then vanished entirely. Only the cave's whispers remained. For the first time since the battle, Kayla felt a strange relief. They were hidden, safe, at least for now. But the man's gaze lingered on the walls, his jaw tight. "What is it?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "These markings. I've seen them before," Kayla frowned. "Where?" He looked at her, eyes shadowed. Not in your world. A chill crept up Kayla's spine. They finally stopped in a wide cavern where a pool of still water reflected the torchlight. Kayla sank to the ground, exhausted. The man lowered himself slowly, grunting at the pull of his wounds. For a moment, silence filled the cavern. But then faintly, Kayla heard it, whispers. Soft, distant, but real. They drifted from the stone itself, curling like smoke around her ears. She shivered. Do you hear that? The man's eyes narrowed. Yes, he said. His voice was calm, but his fists clenched. The whispers grew louder, words forming in no tongue Kayla knew. The torch flickered violently, shadows dancing like living things, and then the water rippled. Kayla scrambled back, her torch shaking. In the pool, shapes moved, dark shapes rising from the depths. The human pulled her behind him, his body tense despite his wounds. Something was coming, not raiders, not beasts, something older. And in that moment, Kayla realized the Watcher's warning was not just about raiders or war. The storm was bigger, much bigger, and it had already begun. The battlefield burned with smoke and fire, the ground trembling with the weight of warships above. Alira stood breathless, clutching the broken spear shaft in her hands. Her eyes locked on the strange human who had fallen from the sky. His clothes were torn, his hands bruised, but his eyes, they burned with a fire unlike anything she had seen before. The alien warriors, the ones who had surrounded her earlier, now shifted their attention fully toward him. Who dares interrupt the circle? One of them growled, his armor glowing red with heat. The human simply rolled his shoulders, cracking his neck as if this was nothing more than a casual fight. Name's Daniel, he said calmly, his voice carrying across the battlefield. And I hate bullies, the crowd of enemies laughed. Their voices like metal scraping on stone. One of them stepped forward, swinging a massive axe taller than Alira herself. The ground split when it struck, the shockwave sending dirt and dust into the air. But Daniel did not move, he raised one hand. And to Alira's shock, the axe froze mid-swing, as though some invisible force had stopped it. The warrior strained, roaring in confusion. But the weapon would not budge. Gasps echoed among both enemies and bystanders. Alira's heart pounded. She had never seen such strength, not even among her own kind. Impossible, one alien whispered. No human should have power like this. But Daniel only smiled, his hand tightening, and with a loud crack the axe shattered into pieces, falling like broken glass across the battlefield. The warriors faltered, uncertain now, and in that moment, Daniel moved. He was a blur faster than eyes could follow. Weaving between armored giants, striking with precision, each hit landed like thunder, sending the warriors flying, their weapons breaking as if made of wood. But it wasn't just brute force. Every move seemed calculated, guided by an unseen rhythm, as though Daniel could predict their attacks before they even happened. Alira tried to step forward, wanting to help, but something in her chest stopped her, a mix of awe, fear, and something deeper. For the first time in her warrior life, she felt powerless, not because she lacked strength, but because standing beside this human made her own strength feel small. The battle turned chaotic. One alien general raised a glowing spear and hurled it at Daniel with all his might. The weapon split the air with deadly speed, enough to pierce a warship's hull. But Daniel lifted his hand again and the spear froze mid-air, spinning in place like a trapped star. The entire crowd stared in silence as he slowly turned the weapon back toward its owner. With a flick of his wrist, the spear shot forward, striking the general and knocking him backward into the dust. Whispers spread across the crowd. Is he a god? No, worse, another said, trembling. He's human. Alira's chest tightened at those words. The stories she had heard of humans, fragile, weak, always running from stronger species, were being shattered right in front of her eyes. Daniel was rewriting everything she thought she knew. He stood alone against an army, and yet he did not look afraid. If anything, he looked angry, but not at the warriors, at the world that had forced this moment. The battle seemed to pause, as if even time was holding its breath. Daniel turned, his eyes meeting Alira's, and for a moment the chaos around them disappeared. Stay close, he said, his voice steady. This fight is only beginning. And in that instant, the earth shook. Above them, a massive warship descended, its shadow covering the entire battlefield. The enemies cheered as its cannons glowed with energy. But Daniel didn't move. Instead, he clenched his fists, his body glowing faintly with light. Alira felt the heat radiating from him, like standing too close to the heart of a star. She realized the truth in that moment. The human wasn't just fighting. He was holding something back, something vast, something dangerous. And if he unleashed it, the galaxy itself might tremble. Alira's hand shook as she gripped her broken spear tighter. Her mind screamed in fear, but her heart whispered another thought. Maybe, just maybe, this is what hope looks like. The warship charged its cannons. The enemies roared, believing the tide was turning. But Daniel only looked up at the sky, his eyes glowing with power. And then he whispered almost to himself, "Time to end this." The battlefield grew still, the air heavy with suspense. Every warrior, every onlooker, and even Alira herself held their breath, waiting to see what the human would do next. And when he moved, the galaxy would never be the same again. The massive warship hovered above, its shadow stretching over the battlefield like a curse. The cannons glowed brighter, charging energy strong enough to melt cities into rivers of fire. The enemy soldiers cheered, thinking victory was near. But in the silence between breaths, all eyes turned to the human, Daniel. He stood tall, dirt and blood on his face, yet his eyes glowed like twin stars. Alira felt her chest tighten as she watched, a shiver running down her spine. This man, this human, was not like the stories. He was something else, something terrifying. The warship fired. A beam of white-hot plasma roared down from the sky. The ground trembled as heat ripped through the air, but Daniel didn't run. He didn't even raise a shield. He simply lifted his hand. The beam stopped, not slowed, not deflected, stopped. It hung in the air, frozen like water turned to glass, crackling with deadly energy. The battlefield gasped. Alira dropped her broken spear in shock, her lips parting but no words came. Daniel clenched his fist. The massive beam shattered like glass, exploding into fragments of light that rained harmlessly across the ground. The alien soldiers who had cheered moments ago now fell silent. Fear spread among them like fire. One of them whispered, trembling. He broke a warship's cannon fire. With his hand, Alira's mind raced. No weapon, no warrior, no army had ever resisted that kind of power. So how could a human, fragile and mortal, do this? Was he even human? The warship roared again, but this time Daniel moved. He leapt upward, higher than any warrior should be able to. The ground cracked beneath where he had stood. Alira shielded her eyes as the human soared into the air, a trail of light following him, and then he struck. The sound was like thunder splitting the heavens. Daniel's fist smashed into the underside of the warship. Metal crumpled like paper. Flames burst outward. The giant ship groaned and split apart, crashing into the ground with a scream of tearing steel. The battlefield shook violently as dust and fire filled the sky. Alien soldiers scattered in terror. Some dropped their weapons, others fell to their knees. The invincible warship, their pride, was destroyed by one man's strike. Alira stared in disbelief, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "What are you?" Daniel landed back on the ground, smoke rising from his hands, his chest heaving with heavy breaths. For the first time, Alira saw strain in his eyes. Power like this came with a cost. Sweat rolled down his face, and his knees trembled slightly, but still he stood tall. The enemy commander stepped forward, his armor black and jagged, his eyes burning red. He pointed his blade at Daniel, his voice sharp with both fear and anger. "You are no mere human," he growled. "What trick is this? What monster hides inside you?" Daniel raised his head slowly, his gaze steady. "I'm no monster," he said softly. "I'm just human." But his words carried a weight that made every heart tremble. The commander roared, charging forward with a blade glowing like molten fire. Daniel met him head-on, their clash shaking the earth. The commander struck again and again, each blow strong enough to crush mountains. But Daniel blocked them all, his fists glowing brighter with every strike, and then Daniel struck back. A single punch, quiet but powerful. The commander was thrown across the battlefield, his armor shattering, his body broken. Silence fell once more. Every enemy warrior stared in horror. If their strongest general could be defeated so easily, then none of them stood a chance. But Alira was not looking at the fallen commander. Her eyes stayed locked on Daniel. She saw the way his hands shook, the faint glow fading from his skin. The truth dawned on her. His power was not endless. Every strike, every defense, every miracle cost him, and if the fight dragged on, he might fall. The soldiers hesitated, torn between fear and rage. But in the distance, horns blared. More warships were arriving. their shadows darkening the horizon. Alira's heart sank. They weren't done yet. The battle was only going to grow worse. Daniel turned his head, his glowing eyes meeting hers once more. "Stay behind me," he whispered, his voice heavy with exhaustion. But Alira shook her head, clutching her broken spear. "No," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "If you fall, this fight ends. I will stand with you." "Human." Daniel stared at her for a moment, and then, for the first time since he arrived, he smiled. It wasn't a smile of arrogance or victory. It was a smile of relief, and together, side by side, they faced the endless storm of enemies approaching. But deep in the shadows, unseen by either of them, another figure watched, a cloaked being, its eyes glowing faintly. It whispered to itself, "So, the human awakens at last." The battlefield was not the end. It was only the beginning. The battlefield was a graveyard of fire and steel. The great warship lay broken in the dust, its flames climbing toward the heavens. Alien soldiers trembled, some dropping their weapons, others crawling back in fear. Yet the fight was not over. Above them, more shadows filled the skies, dark warships arriving in endless waves. Alira gripped her broken spear tighter, her breathing ragged but her eyes sharp. Beside her, Daniel stood tall, though his chest rose and fell with heavy effort. The glow around his hands had faded. His power clearly not endless. Still, he refused to step back. One man against an army, and he did not bow. The horns of the enemy echoed like thunder. From the largest ship, the true commander emerged, a towering figure in black armor with a crown of bone. His voice rolled like distant earthquakes. "You dare to defy the Empire, human? Do you not know what you are?" Daniel's eyes narrowed, sweat dripping down his temple. "What I am doesn't matter," he said, his voice low but sharp. "What matters is I will not let you take another life." The commander laughed, odd and cruel. "Foolish creature, you are not a warrior, you are a weapon. You were never meant to fight for yourself. You were built to be controlled." Alira's eyes widened. Her heart lurching, she turned toward Daniel, confused and shaken. "Built? Controlled? What did that mean? Was he even human?" The commander raised his hand. Strange symbols glowed across his gauntlet. And suddenly Daniel staggered, clutching his head. Pain shot through him like lightning. His knees buckled, and the glow in his eyes flickered wildly. "No," Alira shouted, rushing to his side. Daniel gritted his teeth, fighting the invisible chains that clawed at his mind. The commander's laughter echoed across the field. "You see? He was forged long ago by hands far greater than yours. The last weapon of the old war, a human shell carrying power no mortal should wield. And now he bends to me," Daniel screamed, his body trembling as energy sparked violently around him. The ground cracked, fire and lightning bursting from his skin. Alira grabbed his arm, holding on with all her strength. Her voice rose above the chaos, desperate but unyielding. "Daniel, you are not a weapon, you are not theirs, you are you, fight it." Her words struck something deep inside him. Through the storm of pain, through the flood of voices clawing at his mind, he heard her, clear, steady, real, and in that moment, he remembered why he fought, not because he was made, not because he was told, but because he chose. With a roar that split the skies, Daniel tore free of the commander's control. The glowing symbols shattered into sparks. The commander stumbled back in shock. Impossible. No one should have resisted. But Daniel was not no one. He was human, and humans did not bow. He rose once more, his body alight with fire and lightning. His power blazed brighter than ever. But this time it was not wild. It was his, controlled, focused, unstoppable. The enemy army faltered. Fear spread like plague. Even the commander hesitated as Daniel stepped forward. Every stride shook the ground. Every heartbeat was a drum of war. "You wanted a weapon," Daniel said, his voice like thunder. "But what you made was a man, and a man chooses who he fights for." He leapt into the sky, his fists burned with the fire of stars. The commander raised his blade, but it was too late. Daniel struck. The explosion ripped across the horizon, tearing through ships, soldiers, and shadows. The battlefield was consumed in light. When the dust settled, silence reigned. The warships were gone, the soldiers were scattered or dead, and in the middle of the destruction stood Daniel, his body trembling but unbroken. Alira staggered forward, her eyes wide. You destroyed them all," she whispered. Daniel turned, his breath ragged, his body scarred. But he smiled, a small, weary smile. "Not all," he said softly, and his eyes flicked upward. Far above, beyond the clouds, a massive shadow moved, bigger than all the other ships combined. The true heart of the enemy fleet. It had not joined the battle, only watched. And now it stirred. The war was not over. It was only beginning. Alira felt her chest tighten. Her people had never seen hope like this, never seen a man like him. But if the enemy had more waiting, then the galaxy's darkest days were still ahead. Daniel lifted his head, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his bones. Then let them come, he whispered. For now they know the truth. Humans do not break. And with that, the legend of the human who fell from the sky began to spread, not as a weapon, not as a slave of old wars, but as a warrior who chose. The galaxy would never be the same again.